strategic remorse. And this discernment is not cynicism. It is spiritual maturity. One of the most uncomfortable truths is that healing makes you less emotionally available to those who have not met themselves. This is not arrogance. This is instinct. A healed empath no longer enters spaces where the unconscious is ruling the room. You can still love people, but you stop living inside their chaos. You can still feel compassion, but you stop making it your job to absorb their poison. Many of you have been trained by family, by partners, by friends to become a kind of emotional sewage system. People dump their unresolved complexes into you, and because you are sensitive, you process what they refuse to process. You metabolize their pain. You alchemize their darkness. You carry their projections. And you call this love. But the psyche has a limit. The body has a limit. Eventually something deep inside you says enough. And when this enough awakens, it does not negotiate. 8. It does not ask permission. It does not justify itself. It simply closes the door. This is why so many people are shocked when the empath finally changes. They were never prepared for your number. They were only prepared for your I understand. They were only prepared for your softening. They were only prepared for the endless second chances. But the healed empath is no longer a home for what refuses to heal. Your kindness becomes conditional not on someone being perfect, but on someone being real. At this stage, dreams often change. Many sensitive individuals report that as they heal, their dream imagery becomes darker at first, not lighter. They think something is wrong, but nothing is wrong. What is happening is that the psyche is pulling the shadow closer. It is saying, now you can bear it. Now you can look. You may dream of basements, of locked rooms, of old houses with hidden corridors. You may dream of animals that frighten you, wolves, snakes, crows, creatures of instinct. These are not omens of evil. These are symbols of power that you abandoned. The snake is the life force, the libido, the transformative wisdom. The wolf is your capacity to protect yourself, to belong to your own pack, to stop being prey. The crow is the messenger between worlds, the intelligence of the shadow. The psyche begins to introduce you to what you feared becoming. And here is the paradox. Healing does not remove darkness. It relocates darkness. The unhealed empath is haunted by other people's darkness. The healed empath becomes acquainted with their own. You stop being terrified of selfishness because you discover that some selfishness is sacred. You stop being terrified of coldness because you discover that some coldness is clarity. You stop being terrified of losing people because you realize how many people were never truly with you. They were with your function. In the seminar room of your psyche, the old audience begins to leave. The old roles begin to dissolve, and you may feel loneliness. This loneliness is not proof that you made a mistake. It is proof that you are crossing the desert between persona and self. Most people turn back at this point. They miss the applause. They miss being needed. They miss being the good one. But the healed empath discovers something strange. Being needed is often a subtle form of bondage. It is being chained to other people's emutate, riddy. It is being chained to their refusal to grow. Need is not love. Need is hunger. Love can include hunger. Yes, but love must also include responsibility. Love must include reciprocity. Love must include the willingness to face oneself. And the healed empath becomes frighteningly uninterested in one-sidedness. You stop calling one-sidedness patience. You stop calling imbalance loyalty. You stop calling emotional labor devotion. You start to see your life as energy, not romantic energy, not mystical energy in a vague sense, but psychic energy, libido, your precious inner substance. You start to ask, where is my libido going? And you notice that for years it has gone into people who only take. It has gone into relationships where your sensitivity served as fuel for someone else's ego. It has gone into family systems where you played therapist rather than child. It has gone into workplaces where your empathy was exploited as free labor. It has gone into friendships that survive only because you keep bending. When you heal, libido returns to its rightful home, your own life. This is why healing often produces creativity. Suddenly you want to paint, you want to write, you want to build, you want to learn, you want to travel, you want to be alone. Not because you hate people, but because your soul is finally becoming audible. You were always hearing everyone else's voice. Now you hear yours. There is also a subtle shift in your face. Those who have healed often look less eager, less pleading, less apologetic. Their eyes become steadier. They stop trying to win. They stop trying to convince. They stop over-explaining. And this is where the world becomes uncomfortable with you, because a healed empath is harder to control. You are no longer hypnotized by tears. You are no longer hypnotized by anger. You are no longer hypnotized by charm. Your nervous system becomes wise. It can sense incoherence. It can feel the mismatch between words and energy. It can smell the lie beneath the compliment. And if you have been in relation with narcissistic dynamics, whether in family or romance, you will understand why healing triggers backlash. The narcissistic structure depends on your participation. It depends on your empathy not as love, but as supply. It depends on your constant self-doubt. It depends on your belief that you are responsible for their feelings. It depends on and your reflex to repair. When you heal, you stop repairing what you did not break. You stop explaining what should be obvious. You stop taking accountability for another adult's emotional chaos. In that moment, the narcissistic structure collapses or escalates. Either they leave because you are no longer useful, or they attack because you are no longer controllable. And this is the uncomfortable truth that many spiritual teachings avoid. Healing does not always create harmony. Healing often creates separation. It reveals incompatibilities that were hidden by your self-abandonment. It exposes the fact that your old relationships were built on an imbalance you're giving, they're taking. But let us be careful. The healed empath does not become a judge. The healed empath becomes a witness. There is a difference. Judgment is reactive. Witnessing is rooted. When you witness, you do not need to punish. You do not need to prove. You simply see. And seeing is enough. Seeing changes you. Seeing ends the trance. I will tell you something that may shock you. The healed empath becomes less emotional. In the theatrical sense, you still feel deeply. Yes, but you stop drowning in feelings. You stop mistaking intensity for intimacy. You stop worshiping chemistry. You stop confusing nervous system activation with destiny. Many unhealed empaths are addicted to emotional storms because storms feel like home. They confuse chaos with connection. Because connection in childhood often arrived through crisis, healing teaches your body that calm is not boredom. Calm is safety. Calm is where real love can breathe. And so you begin to seek not the most intense, but the most coherent. You begin to value consistency more than passion. You begin to respect stable warmth more than dramatic affection. This can feel like death to the old you, because the old you lived for spikes of emotional reward. The old you survived on intermittent reinforcement, small moments of affection after long periods of neglect. This is how trauma bonds operate. The psyche becomes trained to chase the next crumb. The empath becomes a gambler in the casino of love. The healed empath leaves the casino. This leaving is not merely behavioral. It is archetypal. It is a shift from the maiden to the queen, from the child to the adult, from the one who waits to be chosen to the one who chooses. It is the emergence of an our authority. An inner authority is deeply offensive to those who prefer you uncertain. At this point you may ask, does healing make the empath cold? Number, but it makes you sovereign. And sovereignty can look cold to those who were feeding on your warmth. Sovereignty means you belong to yourself. You no longer require permission to say no. You no longer require validation to trust your intuition. You no longer require a crisis to justify leaving. And perhaps this is the deepest truth of all. The healed empath becomes capable of disappointment without self-destruction. You finally accept that people may never understand you. They may misinterpret your boundaries. They may call you selfish. They may say you have changed. And for the first time, you do not collapse under those labels. You do not rush to correct the narrative. You do not sacrifice your truth to maintain their comfort. You allow them to have their story. You keep your soul. This is individuation. This is the painful birth of the self within the human being. It is not pretty. It is not marketable. It is not always kind, but it is real. And now if you listen closely, you will sense something inside you that has been waiting a long time. It is not the wounded child. It is not the tired rescuer. It is something older and quieter. It is the part of you that does not need to be needed. The part of you that does not negotiate with disrespect. The part of you that can love and still leave. The part of you that can feel compassion and still protect your life. This is what you become. and the world will call it many things. Some will call it arrogance, some will call it detachment, some will call it betrayal, but the self calls it truth. When I speak of truth, I do not mean a thought that convinces you in the mind. I mean a recognition that settles in the bones. It is the kind of knowing that makes the old arguments inside you suddenly sound childish, like echoes from a former life. You have spent years negotiating with yourself. You have spent years creating inner tribunals where you prosecute your instincts and defend other people's behavior. You have spent years attempting to understand what was never meant to be understood because it was never meant to be humane. The healed empath is the one who finally stops trying to interpret cruelty as a puzzle. You stop turning emotional harm into a riddle that must be solved. You stop turning inconsistency into a spiritual test. You stop turning disrespect into a lesson. This is not bitterness. It is the maturation of perception. And it is at this stage that the psyche begins to reveal to you one of its most secret mechanisms. Your empathy, unintegrated, was not only a gift, it was also a defense. It was your way of leaving yourself without appearing to leave yourself. You could disappear into others while believing you were doing something noble. You could abandon your own needs while telling yourself you were being loving. Many sensitive people have never experienced the true terror of selfishness because they have never tried it. But let us be honest, the fear of selfishness in the empath is often the fear of being punished for existing. It is the dread of becoming too much because you were raised among those who treated your needs as inconvenient, your emotions as excessive, your longing as embarrassing. So you developed the most ingenious strategy. You became the one who has no needs, or rather, you became the one who has needs only in disguise, needs that appear as service, needs that appear as care, needs that appear as endless giving. In this way, you could still be needed, still be loved, still be chosen without ever openly claiming your own life. The empath identity often grows out of a holy bargain with fate. If I am useful enough, I will be safe. So healing breaks this bargain. And when the bargain breaks, you feel exposed, as if you have walked into a room without clothing. You no longer have your old currency. You no longer have the role that guaranteed belonging. You are no longer the one who listens forever, the one who forgives instantly, the one who stays even when it hurts. You may look around and discover this is another uncomfortable truth, that many people do not know how to relate to you without your wounds. They do not know your wholeness. They have never met it. Their love was unconsciously addressed to the injured part of you. This recognition can create grief so deep it feels cosmic. Not only grief for others, but grief for yourself for how long you were willing to suffer in exchange for a semblance of connection. And yet grief itself becomes a purification. In alchemical terms, this grief belongs to the negrado, the blackening, the dissolving phase. It is the moment when the old personality's saint, structure, the old you begins to rot so that something more real can form. You may feel as if you are losing your identity. You may fear that you are becoming empty, that you are becoming numb. But what is actually happening is subtler. You are becoming unhooked. You are withdrawing your psychic projections from people and situations. You are reclaiming the fragments of your soul you left scattered in every relationship where you had to shrink. The healed empath does not become numb. They become unbearable. And this is where the world becomes difficult because most social life depends upon small illusions. Human relationships often survive by not telling the whole truth. Families stay intact by not naming certain patterns. Friendships remain polite by not confronting the deeper resentments. Romantic bonds persist through selective blindness, but the healed empath begins to feel allergic to these unspoken contracts. You sense the lie before it is spoken. You detect the emotional manipulation behind the apology. You feel the pressure to perform agreement, and something in you refuses. It refuses not because you want conflict, but because your soul cannot tolerate betrayal anymore. Not betrayal by others, but your own betrayal of your inner reality. This refusal is the birth of a new ethic. The old ethic was be kind even if it kills you. The new ethic becomes be true even if it costs you comfort. That is the true turning point. It is not an outward rebellion. It is an inner law that begins to govern you. And when this inner law awakens, you will notice that your nervous system changes. Your body becomes intelligent in a new way. It stops enduring what it once endured. It produces fatigue faster around certain people. It produces nausea in environments where you are being subtly gaslit. It produces headaches when you are forcing yourself to stay agreeable. Your body, which you once overrode in the name of love, begins to speak with authority. This is an aspect of healing that many do not consider. Healing is not only psychological insight. Healing is the restoration of the instinct. The empath unhealed often lives in the head. They analyze feelings instead of feeling them. They interpret sensation instead of honoring it. They are constantly thinking their way through life. But when healing begins, you descend back into the animal wisdom of the psyche. You become immune to the simple signals, expansion and contraction, peace and dread, coherence and distortion. You begin to trust what your body has always known. In dreams, this may manifest as the return of primal imagery. You may dream of forests, of oceans, of storms. You may dream of standing at the edge of cliffs, of crossing bridges, of diving underwater. These symbols are not random. The psyche speaks in landscapes. Forests represent the unconscious, the wild, unstructured place where instinct lives. Oceans represent the collective psyche, the great field of emotions beyond your personal story. Storms represent transformation, confrontation, psychic weather shifting. Bridges represent transition. Cliffs represent thresholds. Water represents feeling that must be entered rather than avoided. When an empath heals, they often have dreams where they stop running. They finally turn around to face what chases them. That chasing figure is often the shadow, the disowned power, the anger, the assertiveness, the selfishness that you were taught to fear. The healed empath does not destroy the shadow. They integrate it. Integration is the word most people misunderstand. They imagine it as accepting their dark side as an idea. But integration is not philosophical. Integration is behavioral. It is the moment when you can say no without explaining. It is the moment when you can disappoint someone and still sleep well. It is the moment when you can be misunderstood and remain calm. It is the moment when you can walk away from a relationship that is unbalanced without writing a long farewell letter to prove your goodness. Integration means you no longer have to be pure to be worthy. You no longer have to be perfect to be safe. And this is precisely why healing makes you less nice. The unhealed empath confuses niceness with virtue. But niceness is often a social strategy, a way to avoid conflict, a way to maintain harmony, a way to prevent rejection. Niceness is fear wearing perfume. Kindness, on the other hand, can be fierce. Kindness can say, I will not allow you to abuse me. Kindness can say, I see your pain, but I will not carry it for you. Kindness can say you may be wounded, but you are still responsible. The healed empath becomes kind, but not nice. This difference changes everything. Now there is another uncomfortable truth that must be spoken, especially for those who identify as empaths in the spiritual sense. Many of you believe that your sensitivity is purely a gift, a blessing that you must honor by giving. But sensitivity without boundaries becomes a curse. It becomes a wound that bleeds into everyone and everything. And a healed empath learns that boundaries are not the opposite of love. Boundaries are the container that makes love possible. Without boundaries, empathy becomes possession. It becomes installation. It becomes a kind of psychic cannibalism where you consume others' feelings and they consume yours. So healing brings an astonishing phenomenon. Solitude becomes pleasurable. Not loneliness, but solitude. You begin to enjoy your own company. You begin to prefer silence to small talk. You begin to notice that many interactions were not nourishing. They were merely familiar. You begin to sense how much of your social life was driven by anxiety, by the need to be seen as good, by the fear of being forgotten. Healing removes this hunger. It does not make you isolated. It makes you selective. You no longer feel compelled to keep contact with those who drain you. You no longer feel obligated to maintain relationships through guilt. You stop calling. Guilt love. You stop mistaking obligation for intimacy. And then another archetype arises, the hermit. In many traditions, the hermit is not a depressed recluse. The hermit is the one who returns inward to meet the self. The empath, when healing, often enters a hermit phase. They withdraw not because they are broken, but because they are reorganizing. The psyche needs silence to rewire. It needs emptiness to allow new values to emerge. Many empaths fear this phase because they have been trained to measure their worth through relational feedback. Without constant connection, they feel they do not exist. But healing teaches you exist even when no one is watching. You exist even when no one needs you. You exist as a soul, not as a service. This is why healing often feels like becoming selfish at first. Those around you may accuse you. Your own inner critic may accuse you, but it is not selfishness. It is selfhood. There is a profound difference. The unhealed empath often never developed a true self. They developed a set of responses pleasing, rescuing, adapting. They became skilled at being what others wanted. They became the chameleon of emotional survival. So when you begin to center from your own center, it feels foreign, even wrong. You may experience guilt when you rest. Guilt when you say no. Guilt when you choose yourself. This guilt is not conscience. It is conditioning. It is the leftover leash of your old identity. And here we reach a crucial point. Healing is the unlearning of the guilt reflex. The empath's guilt is often automatic. It arises not because you have done harm, but because you have stopped doing unpaid emotional labor. You feel guilty because someone else is uncomfortable. You feel guilty because someone else is angry. You feel guilty because someone else is disappointed. But the healed empath begins to ask a simple question. Is this guilt deserved? And most of the time the answer is no. It is simply the nervous system's addiction to harmony, the psyche's fear of being rejected. Healing teaches you to tolerate conflict without losing yourself. It teaches you to tolerate being the villain in someone else's story. It teaches you to tolerate the discomfort of not fixing everything. This tolerance is not indifference. It is strength. Now you must understand that as you heal, you become less susceptible to projection. Projection is one of His central dynamics in all human relationships. People see in you what they cannot bear in themselves. They assign you roles. They assign you meanings. The empath is especially prone to absorbing these projections because you are receptive, because your identity boundaries have been thin. You have taken on other people's emotions as if they were your responsibility. But the healed empath stops doing this. You begin to feel the energetic difference between mine and not mine. This is one of the most advanced forms of inner development. You can be in the presence of someone angry and you do not become angry. You can be in the presence of someone anxious and you do not become anxious. You can be in the presence of someone sorrowful and you do not collapse. You can witness without absorbing. In a sense, you become a mirror again, but no longer a flattering mirror. You become a truthful mirror. People see themselves in you and they are not always pleased. Because your healed presence does not participate in their denial. You do not soothe their manipulation. You do not co-sign their excuses. You do not overfunction for their underfunctioning. You allow their consequences to belong to thee. This is where many relationships dissolve, not because you stop loving, but because love without self-abandonment is intolerable to certain dynamics. If you have been in a relationship where your empathy was used as a resource, your healing becomes a threat, and the unconscious, when threatened, does not usually respond with honesty. It responds with strategies, guilt, blame, pity, and raga, sham. The healed empath recognizes these strategies. You do not become superior. You simply become awake. And in becoming awake, you begin to see your own complicity. This is the most painful insight. Not that others harmed you, but that you participated unconsciously in the pattern. You tolerated what you should not have tolerated. You stayed when you should have left. You explained what did not deserve explanation. You returned to the same wound again and again, hoping it would become love. Why? Because the psyche repeats what it has not yet made conscious. The empath often repeats the family wound in adult relationships. You seek the emotionally unavailable parent in lovers. You seek the chaotic caregiver in friends. You seek the one who needs saving because you learned that love is something you earn through sacrifice. Healing breaks repetition. This breaking is like waking from a dream. You look around at your life and wonder how you endured certain things. You feel disgust, not at others, but at the old trance. You may even feel shame for your past softness. But shame is not necessary. Compassion is necessary. Compassion for the self who survived. Yet compassion must not become nostalgia. The healed empath honors the past without returning to it. At this point, you begin to develop a new relationship with power. Power no longer feels like domination. It feels like alignment. It feels like being able to choose. It feels like being able to leave. It feels like being able to withhold. In many spiritual circles, withholding is considered dark. But withholding from what harms you is not darkness. It is wisdom. You stop offering your energy to those who misuse it. You stop giving access to those who do not respect it. And this again is the uncomfortable truth. Healing makes you less universally loving. It makes you more discerning. In the beginning, you may mourn this. You may fear you have become hard. But what has happened is that you have finally met reality. You no longer are alive in ideals. You no longer love the potential in people more than the truth of them. You stop falling in love with what someone could be. You begin to love what is. And if what is destructive, you step back. The healed empath becomes capable of what I would call sacred detachment. Detachment does not mean you stop caring. It means you stop being possessed by care. You can care without losing your center. You can love without dissolving. You can help without sacrificing your health. You can witness pain without making it your identity. This is why healing often produces a strange phenomenon. Your empathy becomes sharper, not broader. You feel less for everything, but more for what truly matters. You stop being emotionally promiscuous. You stop giving your heart everywhere. Your heart becomes concentrated, and in concentration, it gains power. Perhaps you have noticed another thing. The healed empath becomes less talkative. You no longer feel the need to narrate your inner life to those who cannot hold it. You become private. This privacy is not secrecy. It is sanctity. You treat your psyche as sacred ground. Not everyone is allowed there. Not everyone is mature enough to step inside without trampling. This is a psychological milestone because the unhealed empath often overshares. Oversharing is a plea for mirroring. It is the hope that someone will finally understand. But the healed empathizes understanding cannot be begged from those who are asleep. You stop begging. You stop trying to be seen by those who have no eyes. And now, as your inner world stabilizes, something else awakens. Your capacity for joy. Not the manic joy of escape, but the quiet joy of self-respect. There is joy in saying no. There is joy in leaving. There is joy in rest. There is joy in not being needed. There is joy in living from your own center. You discover that many of your former emotions, anxiety, sadness, guilt, were not inherent to you. They were reactions to environments where you were constantly betraying yourself. When self-betrayal ends, suffering decreases. This may sound simple, but it is not, because ending self-betrayal requires you to tolerate the discomfort of being different. It requires you to tolerate the loss of familiar identities. It requires you to tolerate the grief of realizing that some love was conditional. It requires you to tolerate the shame of OutTG, rowing roles that once kept you safe. Yet this tolerance becomes your initiation. You move from the empath as a wounded identity into the empath as a mature soul. So what do you become? Finally, when healing has done its work, you become a person who can love without fear. But do not misunderstand me. You do not become fearless in a naive way. You become fearless because you stop bargaining. You stop begging love to stay. You stop believing that abandonment is death. You stop believing that being alone means being unworthy. You stop believing that your value depends on others choosing you. You begin choosing yourself. And this is the most radical thing a sensitive person can do, because the world, especially the wounded world, depends on your self-abandonment. It depends on your endless giving. It depends on your guilt. It depends on your softness being available to absorb the consequences of other people's immaturity. When you stop doing this, you change the emotional physics of your entire environment. People feel it. They cannot name it, but they feel it. You are no longer easy to manipulate. You are no longer easy to guilt. You are no longer easy to drain. And this to those who lie. Vet off your light feels like darkness, but to your soul, it feels like sunrise. For the first time, your sensitivity becomes yours. Not something that binds you to suffering, but something that guides you to truth. Sensitivity becomes intuition. It becomes artistry. It becomes depth. It becomes a spiritual instrument that helps you perceive what is real. You are no longer a sponge. You are no longer an emotional dumping ground. You become a conscious vessel. And if you listen closely now, you will hear a new voice inside you. It does not plead. It does not explain. It does not apologize. It simply says quietly with the authority of the self, "This is my life." And one, yes. Now let us go even deeper, because the psyche does not stop at the first layer of awakening. The first layer is simple. You stop being exploited. The second layer is far more uncomfortable. You begin to see why exploitation once felt like love. This is the point where healing becomes truly Jungian, because it no longer concerns only what others did to you, but what lived in you that kept the door open. Not in the sense of blame, but in the sense of pattern. For the unconscious does not merely endure, it repeats and it repeats with religious devotion until the ego finally stops calling repetition fate and starts calling it what it truly is, an unintegrated complex seeking resolution. So I ask you in the spirit of honest analysis, not as condemnation but as illumination. What did you gain from being the empath who suffered? What did you gain from being endlessly understanding? What did you gain from being the one who stayed? There is always a gain. Otherwise the pattern would not persist. Often the gain is subtle and sacred in appearance. Moral superiority, the feeling of being good, the comfort of being needed, the illusion of control through caretaking. You may have believed you were powerless, yet in your giving there was often a hidden power. The power to shape the emotional atmosphere, the power to be central, the power to be indispensable. Many sensitive people deny this because it sounds unspiritual, but in analysis we must name what is, not what we wish were. A healed empath becomes capable of seeing their own shadow, and the shadow of the empath is rarely cruelty. More often, it is control disguised as care. It is the covert belief, if I love enough, I can change you. It is the second arrogance of the Savior. My compassion is stronger than your darkness. It is the subtle manipulation of being indispensable. If you need me, you will not leave me. It is not conscious malice. It is a child's magic disguised as adult virtue. Healing destroys this magic, and because it destroys it, you experience a kind of existential humility. You realize that you cannot save people. You cannot heal them. You cannot love them into transformation. You can only love them truthfully. And truth sometimes means letting them remain what they are, without trying to rearrange them into the version your heart longs for. This is the death of what I would call the empath's romantic unconscious. Many empaths are romantics, not merely in love, but in psyche. You believe in the hidden goodness behind.